Welcome to Tough Talk. I'm your host, Paul Taros, and today my guest is Leon Drolet. Leon currently serves on the Macomb County Board of Commissioners. He's running for re-election, and he's also chair of Michigan Taxpayer Alliance. Welcome, Leon.
Thanks for having me, Paul. I appreciate it.
So Macomb County was home of the Reagan Democrats and is currently a stronghold for Trump Republicans. And in August, the smart millage narrowly lost by 39 votes out of 155,000 votes. Is Macomb County becoming a bastion of conservatism?
Well, just to make one thing clear, unfortunately, the test passed by 39 votes. I'd like it to have narrowly lost by 39 votes, but there's 155,000 votes cast on the smart bus tax in Macomb County, and it ended up being 39 vote difference. So it was essentially tied, but the smart bus tax had passed in previous elections by very large margins, and other tax issues on the ballot in Macomb County did pass this current election cycle. So I think what I find is that I'm not sure if Macomb County is sort of a bastion of limited government values or conservatism. I think Macomb County is a bastion of very independent people. And these are folks that will elect, in many cases, Barack Obama by large margins 2 cycles in a row, and then Trump. They've supported Ronald Reagan, they've supported Democrats. So I think it's more independent. And I think the difference has been, at least on the tax issues, in the past, there hasn't really been any organized opposition to the tax increase proposals. And so when the Michigan Taxpayers Alliance is able to put out some flyers, make a case for why this particular tax isn't a good tax, isn't adding much value, people are willing to listen to both sides. So I think the difference really is fierce independence of Macomb County voters, and then also the existence of campaigns to bring out other sides of issues that sometimes, that traditionally have not existed.
Now, I guess I want to mention this right now. I did reach out to SMART to ask if they wanted to have a representative here on the show today, and I never received a return phone call. So with that said, we can continue on. You mentioned you had a campaign against the smart millage. Right. What was the size of your budget?
About $108,000, about $100,000.
And do you have any idea how much SMART spent supporting?
Well, SMART will claim they spent $0, but they spent over $1 million on radio and TV ads, tax dollars, in which they promoted SMART. Now, they didn't say vote yes, but they say, SMART, adding great value to your life. It's an incredibly good thing and helping everybody get around. So their campaign, they don't worry about having to raise money. They use your tax dollars as their campaign tool. Similar, it was a little different, 2 years ago when the Regional Transit Authority, another mass transit tax proposal was on the ballot in 2016. Except the RTA, the Regional Transit Authority, doesn't currently have a tax base yet. So they had to raise money. They spent $3.1 million trying to get a yes vote campaign. We spent about $67,000 on the no vote campaign, and as I'm sure you remember, we very nearly won and defeated the Regional Transit Authority tax proposal. SMART's a little more challenging. Again, it's been accepted for years. Nobody's ever countered it. In Oakland County and in Wayne County, communities can opt out of the SMART tax. So a lot of communities who don't feel they get a lot of value from the smart bus system, they just opt out entirely. In Macomb County, because of a decision made by the county commissioners, like in the 90s, every community is in the smart taxing authority. And then you end up with much closer votes. whereas you're going to get very significant support in Oakland and Wayne County because those who likely vote no have opted out in many communities. So yeah, they still outspent us by a lot, but it was public tax dollars.
I remember the one commercial of a woman saying she got her entry-level job and she was able to get to it because of SMART, and now she's higher up in that company.
Right. But the SMART campaign ads did focus a lot on those kind of stories, and there's no doubt that those kind of stories do exist and are true. But when you look at the U.S. Census Bureau data, in Macomb County at least, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are 3,078 people in Macomb County that use SMART to get to work, like this lady did. 3,078 people. But there's almost 900,000 people in Macomb County. And when you take the taxes generated for mass transit just in Macomb County and divide it by those 3,078 people, you end up paying over $12,000 per rider per year in Macomb County to support those folks. There are better ways of getting people around using 12 grand a year than a giant empty bus that makes you wait in a rainy bus stop. And then it's going to drop. You switch buses twice, and it's going to drop you off a third of a mile away from your end destination. That's a very, very inefficient, inconvenient, in some ways even dehumanizing way of helping people get around. And it's a very expensive way. At least in Macomb, we could take those tax dollars that are currently generated for your gas tax revenue, 8% to 10% of all of your gas taxes that you and your listeners pay at the pump go to mass transit in the state road funding formula. Similarly, when you get your vehicle, renew your license on your birthday, your vehicle registration, 10% of that revenue also goes to mass transit. We don't need a property tax on people's homes on top of that. We could take that pool of money and provide people with transit vouchers that those 3,078 people in Macomb could use an Uber or a Lyft. They would pay 25% of the cost, the person using the system. The taxpayers would pay 75% under the existing gas taxes without a property tax, and they get picked up at their home and dropped off directly at their location without having to switch buses, without having to wait at stops, and it would cost less money to do that. So why wouldn't we do that to help people out? Why would we say, we're going to pay the most but give you the least? And that's unfortunately what SMART does. SMART is a it's a transit system that's been designed for a dense urban area. Buses tend to work best in very, very dense packed urban areas like Washington, D.C. or Manhattan or some of those other dense urban areas. In suburban areas, it's very inefficient. We're trying to impose on suburban communities an urban transit system, and you end up having to support that with massive subsidies beyond what other communities have to. For example, across the United States, across the country, the fare box recovery, in other words, what the people riding the bus pay, they end up paying about 33% of their costs on average throughout the United States. SMART, it's 10.4%. So taxpayers have to pay 90% of the cost to try to make that dense urban system work in a suburban area it wasn't designed for. Unfortunately, it doesn't make much sense, and it's costing a lot of money. And when people hear those facts, a lot more people were willing to say, yes, it's time to try something new. It's time to detach ourselves from the 1970s style transit system and step into the future by incorporating private partnerships with private companies that provide a ride service more efficiently than SMART with a giant fleet of buses with 3 people on each bus and taxpayer paid mechanics and a huge giant bureaucracy. It could be done a lot cheaper.
Going back to these workers who use it to get to their job and back, isn't that really a form of corporate welfare?
In some ways, you certainly see a lot of the business community supporting these taxes. And yeah, it's true, they are having a hard time finding workers, and there's a lot of workers that may live in areas where they may not have a car. So I think that there is a need out there, so to speak, to help connect people with jobs. And yes, it would be better to do it in a private way, and that in some communities that is happening, in a few communities. But a halfway point would mean halfway, and that's say, well, let's jettison the property tax, let's cut the budget in half, and help with those people who can't afford a car, they can't get around easily for whatever reason, and provide them with that voucher they can use a rideshare service, a private rideshare service. It's sort of a halfway point. But it's true that in some, like you find in California, for example, Silicon Valley pays privately operated and run buses to run workers from some of the suburban areas to their headquarters in Silicon Valley, those companies, because they have a hard time finding folks, so they pay for and operate those buses. Unfortunately, we have a very limited vision for some reason in the region. We think that transit must be an old style transit. It must be buses. And across the country, doesn't matter whether it's Los Angeles or Chicago or Washington, D.C. or New York, transit usage has been declining. Traditional mass transit usage has been declining since 2014. Every year it goes down a little bit more. And it doesn't matter how much more you spend. In Los Angeles, they've spent 2 tax increases in the last 10 years to expand their mass transit. Every time they've expanded it, ridership has declined. Why is that happening? Well, there's a lot of theories about it, and I'm not saying I'm a super expert, but it happens to coincide with the emergence of rideshare companies. All of a sudden, when Uber and Lyft came on the scene, those people who could afford Uber and Lyft switched out. They felt it was providing them a better service. And I'm starting to see, it's not just Uber and Lyft anymore. Enterprise Rent-A-Car now has rideshare vehicles. Everybody's getting in the rideshare game. It's not going away. So for us to continue to rumble that old bus down the street, riding a bus or in traditional mass transit, for a lot of people is like using a public bathroom. You use it if you have to, but you really don't want to. And if there's an option, you find it. And people across the country are finding these new options that are emerging in the market. Mass transit will not be the same. Transportation will not be the same. For us to lock our region into like the RTA wanted, the Regional Transit Authority 2 years ago wanted a 20-year tax to prop up a dying technology makes absolutely no sense.
Okay. Why did you decide to do the recount?
Well, when we ended up on election night, it appeared that the smart tax had passed by 27 votes, I believe. And then after the Board of Canvassers did the certification, went to 39 votes. 39 votes out of 155,000 cast is 0.0001% of the election. So in other words, it was an incredibly tiny margin. And frankly, I felt that 2 things. One, for those people, we were really convinced that we could provide better transit for less money than Smart was providing. And if we could win in a recount, when they do the recount and find out what the actual outcome was, it was worth helping people by providing that better service for less money. But second, the electorate, the voters, when something's that close, it's on that big of an election, that close, it's important that people know whether or not what the real outcome was.
Okay. So who paid for the recount?
We had to raise, the Michigan Taxpayers Alliance paid for the recount. We ended up raising about $9,700 to pay for the $25 per precinct recount fee.
Okay. And so that's what they charge you, $25 per precinct?
They do, but it's a little tricky because they charge $25 a precinct, but they count, let's say you live in Precinct 1 in Birmingham. Precinct 1 will have absentee ballots, which count as one precinct, Precinct 1, and then the walk-in votes, which count as another precinct in Precinct 1. So really there are 2 precincts in Precinct 1, even though they're both called Precinct 1. Mm-hmm. So you're really paying $50 a precinct if you want to count the absentees and non-absentees.
Okay. So were you going to recount all the precincts, or was it just select precincts?
Well, to recount all the precincts would have been about $15,000. We decided to recount essentially just the absentee ballots, because absentee ballots are where my understanding is where you're more likely to find human error. When people go vote at the poll, If they make a mistake and fill out a bubble twice or vote in a column that they're not supposed to, the machine will kick it back out. And you can request another ballot, or an election worker can come up and help you understand how you're supposed to fill it out. But when you receive an absentee ballot at home, a lot of folks, instead of filling the little circle, they might put an arrow to the answer that they want. Or they might make a mistake and cross it out with an X and then fill out the other one below it. And then when absentee ballots are counted, it's up to individual human beings at the clerk's offices to try to interpret the voter's intent. And sometimes that's clear, but sometimes it's less clear. Or sometimes the ballot, the mistake wasn't made on the bus tax part, it was made on the candidate part. And when they have to manually count that person's vote because they didn't fill out the circle properly, they forget to look on the back and manually count the proposals. Now, these mistakes are still rare, but they're more likely with absentees than they are with the walk-in votes.
Okay. So was it just the absentees that you were doing a recount?
Just the absentees plus 2 other communities in Shelby Township and Clinton Township where they had some election night, problems with machines and so forth. We thought it would be worth double checking in those communities as well.
Okay. So do you know off the top of your head how many precincts you selected to do the recount?
Well, almost 99% of all the absentee precincts. So I'm going to say we ended up with about 335 precincts in that range that we had a recount done in. And it's a big operation. They had tables set up, I believe 30 tables in a gym where election workers were then manually recounting every precinct on 30 different precincts at one time on 30 different tables. And there's volunteer supporters from both the pro-smart side and our side that were sort of monitoring and doing their best to try and keep an eye on how it was going.
And some of the volunteers on the pro-smart side were actual employees from Smart who took vacation day, I'm told.
Well, yes, there's quite a few Smart employees there. They did say they took a vacation day, which they certainly were not hesitant to use public tax dollars in the course of the campaign. Again, they know not only what the rule is, but exactly how to skirt it. But to my knowledge, they did take vacation days, as far as I know, to be working that recount. Okay.
So what kind of errors did you find?
The first precinct that I was watching them recount was in the city of Warren, absentees in the city of Warren. And they came up with a 4-vote difference between what was reported on election day. So there was actually 2 less yes votes and 2 more no votes. So it was a 4-vote swing. And it's hard to say where that came from. But that, they just counted differently than was counted on election day. And so it's hard to know. Others were easier to see. Like in one case, a voter had voted in every election, all the candidates, governor and Senate and everything, and had carefully filled in every oval. But then when it came to that particular smart tax, there was a very light check mark in the yes box, standing out distinctly from how they had filled out the rest of the ballot. And so there was a debate over, is that an inadvertent mark where they just moved their pencil, or is that an actual vote? And it was determined that it was an inadvertent mark that had originally been determined as a yes vote because it was not consistent with how the voter had filled out everything else. So there was some debate and dispute about that. But a lot of the errors that we found were simply very small changes, sometimes in our favor, sometimes in the other side's favor, from what the total was on election night, and usually involving at most 1 or 2 votes per precinct. I would say 75% of the precincts that were recounted, there was no change. In 25%, there was a vote or 2 change, one way or the other. And I can also see how, even in recounts, mistakes can be made. For example, there was 2 recounters that were working the recount that I was monitoring. And one of them would hold up the ballot and say, I see a yes vote, hand it to the other person and say, I see a yes vote, and put it in the yes file. And after like 3 yes votes in a row, the person gets used to putting in that pile. Then there'd be, I see a no vote, person say, I see a no vote, they put it in the yes pile, because they just put the other 4 or 5. You're like, whoa, 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 no, that goes in the no pile. I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry. And it wasn't intentional. It's just human conditioning. You just put last 5 in a row in the same pile. You know, human mistakes are made.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Okay. So I believe you had scheduled the recount for 2 days, but you discontinued it after 1 day. Why was that?
Well, the Macomb County Clerk's Office, elections clerk, had estimated it would take 2 days to do the recount. At the end of the first day, they had actually completed 75% of the precincts that we had asked for a recount in. So the next day, there was only 25% left to go. Well, looking at the results from that first 75%, we had picked up only a net of 3 votes. So we had picked up some votes in this precinct, lost a few more in that precinct, picked up some here, lost 1 there. The net vote change was only 3 votes. Knowing that that's, and seeing that 75% of the precincts coming in were no changes, that left a very small number left that we were going to have a chance to pick up that difference in. We realized that mathematically it was very unlikely that we would make up that difference, and we get a refund for any precinct that ends up not being recounted. We decided at that point that we would rather have the $2,000 back on those uncounted precincts because the odds of those making a difference at that point were just too small.
Okay. So getting back to the buses, how much does a bus cost?
You mean to purchase a bus?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Okay.
Sorry.
I did some research online. I saw that it costs anywhere from $300,000 to $600,000.
Okay.
I mean, depending upon the quantity purchased and how you're outfitting it, whether you're putting in Wi-Fi and things like that.
Well, many of them outfitted with propane as a fuel. I don't know what that costs to convert. I do know what SMART's budget is, and then we know how much money is being raised in taxes and how many riders there are, at least in Macomb. In Oakland, that can be determined too. I mean, the Census Bureau does ask a question, how do you get your regular way of getting to and from work? And that's on the American Community Access Survey that Census Bureau does. So even in Oakland County, it was a very, very, very small percent. But again, Oakland County has the opportunity for people to opt out. So you've got a lot of the rural areas that have opted out where essentially nobody uses a SMART bus. Now, one of the arguments made by those that support SMART are, okay, so not many people use the SMART bus to get to work. What about seniors? What about people in wheelchairs? Well, those folks, do need assistance, transit assistance. But again, people are already paying mass transit taxes through their gas taxes, 10% of their gas tax, through their vehicle registration fee. Those monies are used to help grandmother get to her doctor's appointment, to help somebody in a wheelchair, get to an event. Those little commuter buses, the smaller vans and smaller buses, that's a small percent of SMART's budget. 87% of SMART's budget is the giant, big line haul buses. But when SMART does their radio and TV ads, they never talk about people in their giant, empty bus. They always focus on the person using a little commuter bus. And in kind of ways, misrepresent themselves as if that's their primary business. Even in those areas, there are new services being developed for those folks. So, for example, Uber has a Uber Wave service, WAV, wheelchair assistance vehicle. They have other vehicles where they help somebody get in the vehicle for seniors and so forth. So the market is coming around and providing services that can help those folks too. Sure, those small transit buses probably last, that will be transformed by the rideshare technology, but it's happening already.
Okay. Now, in my research, I came across that costs to operate a bus each hour anywhere from $100 to $180 an hour. So if you're paying $2 for a fare, you got to have 50 to 90 people riding per hour. That's
well, we know that again, according to SMART's own data, they only get 10% of their 10.4% of their budget from fares. The rest is tax dollars. So they're not generating enough riders even to meet the national average of 33%, being paid for by fares. But there are other things that drive up SMART's cost too. For example, when the director of SMART, Mr. John Hertel, came before the Macomb County Board of Commissioners this past spring to make a proposal to put the SMART tax back on the ballot, I asked him what kind of pensions SMART employees have. Well, they have something called defined benefit pensions, a type of a pension system that's oftentimes called colloquially jackpot pensions, that are very, very lavish and expensive pension systems that the state banned for state employees in the 1990s. Oakland County, Brooks-Patterson eliminated those sort of lavish pensions back in the early 2000s. Macomb County took a little longer. We didn't abolish those lavish style pensions until about 2007, 8, during the Great Recession, when it was no longer affordable. Almost every unit of government has gotten rid of the jackpot pension system except SMART. They still have it because SMART is kind of a hidden level of government. It's not the state with the governor, it's not the local elected officials, it's not a government body that people see. It's almost like this hidden niche of government where, like Jurassic Park, there's still features of the past that haven't transformed or evolved in current reality. So you're ending up paying these lavish pension systems for SMART government employees that have been abolished everywhere else in the state, almost everywhere else in the state. And they don't feel the pressure to change because people keep reapproving the tax. Because nobody votes for the SMART director, nobody votes for a representative on SMART, so they can hide a lot of these very expensive and lavish expenses that drive up the cost of the buses in a way that your average person really doesn't see.
Well, talk about hidden. Defined benefit is also currently available if you work for the Michigan Catastrophic Claims Association.
Oh, okay.
So,
well, there are a few places. Not every place has eliminated defined benefit.
Right.
As a matter of fact, the state finally got around to, I guess you could say, strongly transforming public school systems away from that just in the last year or two. Although many school districts had started to move away, not all did. So government was the last place that these defined benefit packages could still be found. And now it's only the more hidden niches, but like another one you just not mentioned, I mean, who knows who's on the Michigan Catastrophic Claims board? Nobody knows. So they cling to these artifacts of the past that are unfortunately very expensive.
right. Well, with that, we're going to have to end it, but I wish you luck in your continued fight for the taxpayers, and I wish you luck in your re-election campaign.
Well, I appreciate that, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Leon.
Thank you.